Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to We Miss the Point. To all my fellow point missers out here, today we are in fact talking about pride. And by that I mean when you get defensive about everything. Pretty much what this episode I think is going to be about. Who knows where we could end up. But for now, I think I really just want to talk about how I'm beginning to personally understand my emotions better and also things that are triggering me. And for a long time, I felt like I was quite disconnected from my emotions in the sense that I'd be really happy, I'd be really excited, and then the other emotion I would feel was just like overwhelm. Like there was no in between. So I am reading this book at the moment and it is called Letting Go. It's incredible. I really want everyone to read it. If you have a moment to read, I really recommend it. What it's about is it's by this psychiatrist and he talks all about the sort of levels of emotion and how you kind of start off at depression or apathy when there's just no hope. And then from there, you kind of move up to guilt and shame. And then there's sort of like courage. And then from there, there's probably some things in between that I can't remember, but then it's like love and peace. And he works his way up and just talks about how once you can let the lower level emotions go, you slowly start experiencing the higher emotions, which are like love and peace. And when you're in that state, you best believe everything is a-okay. And actually, really quickly, this is actually an interesting thing to touch on real fast. I've briefly mentioned this guy, Chris Williamson, in one of my old podcasts, or like a recent-ish one, but he talked about on his Instagram the other day, he is trying to create a wave of people or just a wave in social media where toxic positivity isn't looked at as like a bad thing or isn't looked at as a concept at all. And I actually really liked this. Let me explain. So I think toxic positivity, I guess if I was to give it a definition, it's kind of when you're overly positive and you're kind of ignorant to the fact that like there's bad things going on and you're just sort of like living in this fake bliss. Now, I can understand to a degree that especially on social media when people are just posting all the things that they're doing and how great their life is, I can see how that can be or can negatively impact people for sure. However, his sort of point was, what is wrong with being positive and looking for the good in things most of the time? And I loved this because I have definitely heard people would be like, oh yeah, toxic positivity, like hate that, like da. And like, I do agree to an extent, as I said before, but when I thought about it, I was like, that is so true. And what is so true, Zoe? I just really could relate to this because I think a lot of my life, I am looking for the positive. I am looking for the lesson. I am looking to sort of work out where I can grow from something. And so a lot of the time I could imagine that people would sort of think, oh my God, you're just like toxically positive. But it's not that at all. And I just really loved that he wanted to sort of start this movement of being like, fuck toxic positivity. Like, why are we saying it's a bad thing when, yes, okay, if you're feeling bad about something and someone comes in and it's like, no, it's all good. Like, don't stress. Like I feel like that's another whole thing. Like, I think that's almost just being like unable to sort of read the room. But I think in your own self, I think there's nothing wrong with looking for the positive and not letting negative things sort of get to you. Because I quite honestly, I feel like at the moment, and I'm going to go into this with even the like emotions and stuff, but once you sort of work out how to let go almost of certain things and realize that you can find the lesson and you can find the positive in things, you just don't want to be negative. Like, it's as simple as that. And okay, I probably shouldn't say it as simple as that because trust me, I've definitely been in places where like, or been through times when I probably wasn't overly positive. But once you sort of, as he says in the book, like you slowly start letting go of those lower emotions and you release that attachment and you realize that at the end of the day, it's actually not going to be that bad. So yeah, that was just a little quick side note. I really like that from him, that toxic positivity, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think there's anything toxic with being positive unless you're being ignorant. There's a big difference. So yeah, don't know where I was going with that, but I think what I was saying, about how you can level up. So the main one I want to talk about today is pride. And when I first sort of started reading this chapter and he was talking about like, you know, how does pride show up in your life? I had a bit of a think and I was like, I definitely can remember teachers or parents or people talking about how, you know, you want to take pride in your work or you want to take pride in your appearance or you want to take pride in maybe it's your footy team, whatever it is, you want to take pride in those things. And when I spoke to one of my friends about this, she's actually Brazilian, and she said that pride in her country has quite a negative connotation to it, which I found really interesting, because I definitely think that in Australia, or at least where I sort of grew up, pride in itself probably was looked at as bad. Like, I think if you said, is pride a good thing? People would probably be like, no, you don't want to come across like cocky or arrogant, which I'm going to go into later. But when I really thought about the core of pride, and you can also interchange it with ego to a degree. I was talking to another friend about this, and they understood it better when they were thinking of pride as ego. Initially, when I thought about pride, I thought about being told to sort of take pride in various things. And even I remember growing up, and I have never had much of an attachment to my things. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that in a bit, but I don't know, whether it's my clothes or my belongings, I feel like I'll wear them until they literally look like they've been pulled out of a bin. Like, if anyone knows me, my shoes are literally broken by the time that they're thrown out. I've never had a problem with people borrowing my clothes. I don't know. I've never really had an attachment to my things. And for a very long time, I almost thought that this was a negative. Sometimes I'd find that I'd be thinking to myself, should I be taking more pride in my stuff? Or I'd go out looking like a bum, and I'd be like, should I be taking more pride in my appearance? So that's just sort of what's going on in my head when I'm first reading that. Sort of talks about how the prideful person is always on the defensive, because they're always feeling the need to defend whatever it is, because they've sort of taken that prideful stance. Because when we really think about pride or ego or whatever you want to think of it, it's coming from a place with a lack of love. It's almost this need to be justified. When we kind of let go of that pride, you almost have this inner strength and this inner knowledge that whatever you're doing or whatever it is, it's just worthy as it is. So I want to briefly touch on false modesty. Modesty is when you don't value yourself any better or any worse than anyone else. You're just sort of where you are at that level, and that's perfectly fine. Sort of like being humble. When you're humble, you don't think you're any better than anyone else. You don't think you're any worse. You're just all level. So false modesty is when you intentionally pull yourself down in hopes that someone will actually bring you back up. Now, I'm sure we all can take a moment to go back to primary school or school in general, and there's someone that is getting an A+, 100% in the test, and they're sort of oh my god, I did so bad, I got 1 mark off. Then everyone's no, you're so smart, what do you mean? Or there's someone's getting ready and they're oh my god, I look so bad in this, I hate this. And it's sort of almost that inner desire to sort of be appreciated without having to overtly say it themselves. And when I really thought about this, I was oh my God, I think as women even, we're sort of told from a kid, it's you want to be proud of your achievements, but then you can't be cocky. You can't actually brag about it. So then we almost develop this desire to still be heard and be seen and be valued. So we kind of play ourselves down and hope that someone will pull us back up, which is sort of that false modesty idea. And then guys, on the other hand, I feel they tend to sort of, when they've been told to be proud and take pride in their things, so they come across almost cocky and arrogant. Whereas females, as I said, we sort of almost turn to this false modesty so that we still get that value that we desire, but we're not doing it openly, and we're not bragging. Because I remember growing up as a kid, and it was always don't brag, you don't want to be boastful, be modest, be humble. But at the same time, there was sort of this underlying, maybe if we're talking from an ego perspective, maybe it is just a natural sort of thing rather than being told to take pride in your stuff. I'm not sure, but I don't know, it was just a really interesting thing to think about, because I can definitely relate to growing up and feeling I couldn't express or be proud of the things that I've done, but then you almost want to, you still want to be recognized, you still want to be appreciated. And so I guess that's where that false modesty sort of comes from. I also can remember sort of being in school or being younger, and people would sort of pull themselves down, and people would say, oh, they're attention seeking, or fishing for compliments, that sort of thing. And now that I think about it, I'm we probably just haven't allowed ourselves to actually, you know what though, maybe it's even that we haven't been taught how to truly love and value ourselves. We've been taught to be proud, but then with that, we can't brag. Maybe if there was more of a focus on it being okay that whatever you're doing isn't going to be perfect, like nothing's going to be perfect, but understanding that like that is enough, maybe that's something that should be more of a focus. But then at the same time, like I also think in sport or, in various areas of life, like you definitely can't go around saying that everyone's a winner and, you're perfect just the way you are. Don't worry about putting in all the effort, like, that sort of thing where everyone gets a ribbon. I also don't agree with that. But I think maybe if there is more focus sort of on valuing yourself and sort of genuinely appreciating your inherent value and worth, that would then eliminate that sort of need for pride, I think. I don't know if anyone's going to be listening to this and be like, Zoe, I have never been like this. And maybe you haven't. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But I have started to realize lately that, and like when I say lately, I literally mean in the past 2 weeks, I will notice in the day when I start getting defensive. And this is where this sort of pride comes back to opinions. And it's something that I really want to speak on more now, is that I started to realize that I am so defensive sometimes when it comes to certain people saying things. And I think this is probably where pride and ego sort of like intertwine in a sense. But it sort of comes back to just understanding that, let's say you've got an opinion. So a good example actually is the other day I was at my house, just chilling over there, and my roommate said, oh, like, don't you miss going out? And I instantly sort of was like, oh, like, what? No, like, why would I miss going out? And in my head, I was thinking like, what, Zoe? Like, why did you just get defensive? And so I sort of thought about it for a little bit. And then the next day I was going for my walk with Anna, who we love. So pretty much we were sitting down at the table and I was like, yeah, I got really defensive when Catherine asked whether I miss going out. And I didn't understand why. And we sat there for a moment and we're just like, is there the possibility that maybe there's this part of me that hasn't fully accepted the fact that like I am loving this new way of life, and whether I'm still sort of holding on to this old version of myself? And like when I sat with that, I really, really was like, oh my gosh. Because my biggest thing at the moment has been that I've felt like I wanted to articulate myself better. I felt that I wanted to be more confident with what I'm saying, because I often felt very flustered and like almost like there was two sort of people talking in my head. There was sort of this side of me that was like doing the podcast, working on my mindset, learning about spirituality and energy and quantum physics and psychology and philosophy and all those things that now I'm really loving learning. But there's also this part of me that used to look at that shit and think it was stupid. Like there was the old Zoe, and I'm going to say old Zoe, it's just easier, but like I used to think meditation was the stupidest thing. I used to think journaling was the stupidest thing. Like I never did any of this stuff. And so I think when I am trying to speak about it, there's this part of that old Zoe that's sort of like, what are you talking about? Like you sound so stupid right now. And when I sort of realized that, and we were sitting at the table and talking, I just had a realization that I think what's holding me back from sort of taking it to that next step is that other part of me that's still talking in my head being like, you sound so stupid. And I can't fully embody this sort of new person that wants to speak about this because I'm being judged by myself, which is insane. Like what? As if after all this time of like me feeling like there was two different people, there literally was two different people. And even in the book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, he talks so much about the polarizing self and how, there's the person that you're showing to the world and then there's the person that you are internally. And I think the person that I'm showing to the world was super like outgoing and carefree and never gave a shit about anything. And then the person that I was sort of on the inside was still like that, but I just cared a lot more. Yeah, I care a lot about what people think at the end of the day. And when I let go of my pride to take it back to that, I realized that that was okay and that is just something that I can now work on. And I think I want to go more into like shame and guilt in the next episode, or like next solo episode. But I kind of just wanted to briefly touch on that because it was sort of this massive realization that I've been living in this like inner conflict of one part of me wants to speak about all of this stuff and the other part of me is like, that is so stupid. And I think because I used to probably judge people a lot for talking about this stuff, I sort of know what people could be saying, which is so silly when I say it out loud because, you know, I talk all the time about not caring about what people are saying. But it's always going to be hard. And I think allowing myself, and as he talks about in the book, sort of as you start to let go of those lower emotions, you then can like feel that love. And I think lately, as I've been reading through it and like really embodying that more love perspective, I literally have found that I'm judging myself so much less. I'm also judging everyone around me so much less. Like I truly feel like I can't judge anyone. And I think what comes with that is that I can't judge myself. I've like written some questions down that I wanted to ask about pride. So like, how does pride show up in your life? Pride sort of showed up in my life mainly in terms of my opinions. So as I said before, sort of that need to always defend myself and defend the things that I believed. And it was very subconscious. Like I wasn't aware of it. But and this is why the book is so brilliant, is because it brings so much awareness to the things that you didn't even realize you were doing. And that's the biggest thing with awareness. You're not aware you're doing it. So it's so difficult to pick up on it. Like I think initially I used to think, oh yeah, I must be doing all of these things right because I don't realize that I'm not. But it's, I don't know how to explain it. It's until you actually realize that you are acting in a certain way or thinking a certain way that then you can actually work on it. And so when I started to realize as I was speaking that I was defending certain things, I was able to sort of take a step back and understand what was causing me to feel like I needed to defend myself. And in that other example about needing to defend why I'm not going out as much, it was sort of then realizing that I had all this pride around like going out, and there was this part of me that was like, what? No, like that's still me. Like I'm not some person that just sits at home and reads her book and all that stuff, when I love that. Like why did I feel like I didn't want to admit to that and I didn't want to be, oh my God, I'm almost so proud. So it's like ingrained in me. But I now am working on truly just like appreciating and loving that like this is what I'm doing. And yeah, I guess breaking down that sort of need to justify why I'm doing certain things or why you're doing certain things. Because if you're feeling like you need to justify them, then there must be a sort of small part of you that doesn't fully, truly believe that that is what you should be doing. And at the end of the day, like you should be doing whatever you truly, truly want to be doing. And that takes work to sort of, I'm going to do an episode on values in a little bit as well. But, and the other thing that I wanted to briefly talk about is that like, you definitely don't want to view pride as bad, because at the end of the day, like if you're viewing pride as bad, then that's ultimately going to lead to guilt, and guilt's one of the lowest emotions. So if you're listening to this and then maybe, you know, later tonight you kind of are having a conversation with someone and you notice you get a bit triggered and you want to sort of like defend yourself, just take a moment and be like, oh, like interesting. Like it's not a bad thing. It's just being aware. Like even, you know, let's say your roommate sort of does something that pisses you off. Instead of sort of being like, oh my God, like this, and this, and sort of like thinking about all the things in your head that you could say to them, or think about how they did wrong to you, or how they're in the wrong and they shouldn't have done whatever they did, or even if it's a parent or a sibling or a friend, that constant thinking about like what they've done wrong is so unnecessary. Like when you actually come from a place of love and just like understanding and just be like, okay, like they clearly reacted in that way because something happened with them or like whatever it is, and it's not putting the blame on them, but it's just being able to let go of that like need to be right and that need to sort of have the last say and the need to prove that what they did was wrong. Because why? Like at the end of the day, like there's no need, or at least this is what I'm thinking. And I don't know if you'll be listening to this and being like, nah, like, you know, I have every right to sort of say that whatever they did is wrong. And obviously there's some situations where of course, but I think overall when you can start to take a more loving approach to situations, it shifts so much. Like actually even this, like what I'm saying right now is just truly what I'm like loving to talk about. if you were to come at me and be like, Zoe, that is so stupid, I'd be like, okay, like that's fine. Like you can think whatever you want. There's nothing wrong with that. Like let's say you like love a type of music genre. If you're like, oh my God, like I love this song so much, like it's great. Like people aren't realistically going to be like, no, that's such a shit song. I mean, maybe they are, but then we don't want them in our life. But like most likely people aren't going to come at you from like a defensive standpoint if you're coming from a loving standpoint. Whereas if I said, oh my God, like I'm listening to the best song, like it's so much better than like, you know, this other song, then there's room for opinion. Then there's room for them to get defensive, and there's room for them to be like, no, like my song's better because of this. Whereas if you come at it and you're just like, oh my God, like I love this, like I love my football team, or oh my God, I love sushi so much. Like no one can then realistically be like, no, sushi is so gross. Like, and if they do that, then that's a them problem. But I don't know. I think when you do take a more loving approach, it kind of diffuses any defensiveness or any pride. Like, well, it diffuses a lot of things, even anger. Like if someone's really angry at you and they're sort of yelling and it's not realistically for any real reason, maybe they just like had a really shit day and they're sort of venting or whatever it is. If you can then just sort of be like, come from a loving perspective and not get defensive and not sort of put the blame back on them and just be like, okay, like it's all good, and just sort of diffuse the situation. I've seen it in my life in the past few days, and like it genuinely makes such a difference. Okay, so I kind of hope that was all sort of like made sense and that you guys liked it. Yeah, I found it just a really interesting sort of thing to look at and be aware of in your life, because mainly for defensiveness, like when we are getting defensive, that's effectively meaning that like pride is sort of taking over. And I think having the word for that and having the understanding of that, that's really helped me lately, because before I didn't really know to identify it as pride or the ego. I sort of just was getting defensive. And as you can sort of start to like let go of that, it is so powerful. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy, and I'm really excited for the next episode. I'm going to do one with Cage, and then I'm also going to do one on like shame and guilt. Maybe we're going to talk about some other stuff, but for now, I hope you all have such an incredible rest of the week. And yeah, we're going to be back and ready to go. So I hope you enjoy.